Want to find out what one of the biggest killers in diving is that you probably aren't even aware of? Then please keep watching. Hi everyone, Nico Lura here from the Dan Europe YouTube channel and the Dan Top 10 show. Hope you're all doing really well. Today I got something special. I've got a really great interview lined up to share with you all with some serious noteworthy guests who will be addressing this question I just asked, amongst many others. Let me introduce the channel guests. Michael Menduno, who will be leading the interview, is the editor-in-chief of InDEPTH magazine, a senior editor with Dan Europe, and a GUE technical diver. And as I said, he'll be conducting today's roundtable interview. He will be joined by Dr. Matthias Noceto, who has been the Director of Medical Services and Programs for Dan US since 2007. He is also chair of the Dan America Committee for the Recompression Chamber Assistance Program and a member of Dan's Institutional Review Board. He's also an SSI diving instructor since 1999 and is a National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration trained diving medical officer. Also with us is Dr. Constantino Balestra, who is the Vice President of Research and Education for Dan Europe. He is also the Director of the Integrative Physiology Laboratory and a full-time Professor of Physiology at the Haute École Bruxelles-Brabant. Dr. Balestra is a PADI instructor and rebreather diver. So with those intros done, and as I said, they are very noteworthy, let me now turn it over to Michael for what I'm sure is going to be a fascinating interview. And as always, if you like this type of content and you're fans of the Dan Europe channel, please do consider subscribing to the channel before you go. Now over to you, Michael.
Good. Welcome, gentlemen. How are you both today?
Good.
Very
How are
good.
you?
Oh, good. I'm very good. Yes. So I'm hoping we can talk some about fitness and diving. And I thought maybe to start, just broad view, what are the most recent research findings regarding the relationship between fitness and risk for diving injury?
Well, I can
you're-
start, and
Yes.
I can start, which is very clear nowadays that a lot of diving-related fatalities are cardiac-related. So your heart, as we know, is your source of life, and we know we have to keep our heart in good shape to have a good life. And as far as we understood right now, since a long time, a lot is cardiac related. So it means we need to keep it in under good shape. So this means fitness.
Right.
Yeah, no, I echo that. I mean, we always say, as divers, we're always fascinated, obsessed with decompression stress, bubble formation, and growth. And the real boogeyman in diving is the heart, by far. And as we know, in at least in the US, our diving population is anything but young and fit and healthy.
We want to talk a little about that, yeah? Right.
So yeah, I absolutely second that. Is the heart. We don't get fit by diving, we get fit to go diving.
Gotcha. So let's, if we could, maybe when we say fit to dive or fitness to dive, define that. What does that mean? Fit to dive. In broad terms, we're going to dive into some of the aspects, but just overall, what does that mean? Fit to dive.
I would say you have medical fitness to dive, you have physical fitness to dive, and then I would say environmental fitness to dive and temporary fitness to dive, right? So medical fitness is, do you have any medical condition that would make you more prone to an accident or a disease, or to precipitate a disease while diving? And then physical fitness is, are you fit to dive, to do this particular dive? And then temporary fitness could be, am I today okay to dive? I mean, maybe I'm just coming out of a cold, right? And that is very common. And a very common thing we see here on the hotline at Dan is people having sinus issues, sinus traumas. And when you ask them if they had any recent upper respiratory tract infection or something, and they say, well, I mean, I came out of a cold a couple of week ago or so. I finished the course of antibiotics, but they assume that they were fine because they can breathe freely through the nose. And that only proves your nose is clear, not your sinuses.
Right.
And then when we say environmental fitness, and this is something we've been hammering, and I think we're never going to stop hammering, is some diving destinations are so remote that you may no longer fit to be there. You know, when we say, when you go on a liveaboard and you pay $7,000 to dive on a liveaboard in the middle of nowhere, I mean, a day and a half away from civilization, when you have the money to afford those trips, you no longer have the health to be there,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But I want to say something about this. I totally, of course, second what Matthias said. I would say that fitness to whatever, or fitness to dive, doesn't really mean a lot. I will tell
Mm.
you, is it fitness to life the real thing? Because it depends on what kind of life you're living. If you're fit to live your own life just sitting looking at your screen, or be fit for your life that you want to run every day 20 miles. This is a different story. So
Mm.
what kind of fitness you need to live what you want? So it's not fit to dive, it's fit to live, or what kind of dive you want to do.
Mm. So for example, I could be fit in terms of, I don't know, again, being on a liveaboard boat, rolling off the boat, doing easy recreational dives versus some big honking cave dives where I'm wearing, 6 cylinders and a rebreather and 2 scooters and a lot more weight and stress to that. So the level of fitness required is different. That's what you're saying. Yeah. Yeah. And so we've talked a little about cardiac. I want to get back to that, but then just muscular fitness, right? That's an important aspect as well
Yeah,
with
that's
diving. Yeah,
that's what we would describe as physical fitness.
physical fitness, yeah, as opposed to cardio fitness. What about and what about, we're talking fitness? What about diet? Is that have an impact on our diving too? I mean, in terms of fitness and healthy diets, or not? I know the free divers are very into this, right? Yoga, meditation, vegan lifestyle. I mean, is that relevant to scuba divers being a vegan or a carnivore or any of that?
I have personal opinions, but I will leave that to Tino.
Oh, there you
You may not be surprised that I have personal opinions as well.
go. Right. We
By
all
the way,
do.
putting
Yeah.
this in a very general, broad point of view, diving by itself seems to be a kind of hard occupational burden, but it's not. If you look at what dive really costs in a metabolic way, it's not so hard. But you never know what can happen. And this is the real point. In diving, normal diving can be
Nice.
very soft somehow, but you never know what can happen. And one particular point, you need to go a bit over, and then you have other issues like work of breathing, density of your gas, and so on and so on. And you understand the point. The best fitness you have, the less
Hmm.
costly effort you have to make in a particular moment. So it's always better to be more fit than you need in case of whatever can happen. It looks like so simple to be said, but maybe it has to be said again.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes, that no, that makes good sense. So how, if we look overall at the community, and you alluded to this earlier in the call, how are we doing as a community? Maybe the recreational community, and then maybe looking at the tech community. How is the community doing with regards to fitness and all of that, would you
I
say?
think the community at large is very heterogeneous. Now, when you think within different groups, I think they're much more homogeneous in general. I would say
Mhm.
perhaps the fittest, and this is just shooting from the hip, are perhaps the free diving community.
Right.
And I would perhaps put second maybe, and I'm hesitating, perhaps the technical diving community, because they tend to be much more conscious, perhaps.
Mm,
But
mm,
and I think the most heterogeneous one is the general recreational diving. You know, the sport divers. 90% of our community is, and you have anything from, you know, from the young and healthy and fit to the not so much of any. But I think it
right.
also changes depending on countries and region.
Mm,
I think from my experience, divers in Asia, and even I would say in Latin America, they tend to be much younger than
mm.
the divers that we see in the US. And in Europe, I don't know what's your experience, Tino, and Michael, you too.
Yeah, this is also very much depending on the region, absolutely. And
Mm,
of course, then you go for kind of habits of whatever of normal physical activity, but also you get then into the diet as well. But
mm,
at the end of the point, I think that physical activity is over diet. But of course,
mm,
the amount of physical activity to overcome your diet is different from country to country. But the real, let's say, cure for poor diet is physical activity. And
deserves,
of
yeah.
course, one goes with the other one. When you go for sufficient physical activity, you will educate yourself in understanding by yourself that you need a
Mm,
different diet. And so we have to point this out. And we know every day that we open diving to a lot of different communities and age
mm,
levels and whatever. But one very important community that I'm very aware of is disabled divers. And
huh,
those
yeah.
particular divers, they're not extreme divers, but they are very keen to know what to do and they're not pushing their limits too
Mm,
much. And we don't have a lot of problems with those divers because they know how to cope with their limits. And
mm.
that's maybe what we need to learn.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, that's a really good point. Mm. And I agree with you. Just looking at the communities, I mean, every time I go to Asia for dive shows, lots of young people. But tech shows, certainly in Europe and the US, it tends to be older, grayer
Yeah.
people, right? Higher average age in the 50s, maybe even higher. Yeah, 40s, 50s, like that. So interesting. You mentioned, of course, that cardiovascular health is, you know, a major issue, a leading factor in diving. The lack of it being a major factor in diving fatalities. And isn't it? I'm trying to remember something like 20 to 30% of fatalities are some cardiac implication for them in the Dan report, something like that.
Oh, that, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, so it's high. So what screening protocols do you recommend for divers, and in particular maybe different requirements for older divers than younger divers? What do we recommend with regards to cardiac health and screening?
A number of years ago, we put together an article that it's on our website, which is, I think the name is Lifelong Guidance for Fitness to Dive, where we
Hmm,
make recommendations based on what's your age, when was the last time you had a fitness to dive physical medical examination, and so on.
mhm,
As you know, when you become a diver, all you need is to fill out a form and say, yeah, I don't have any of these, and you go on.
right.
And there's nothing out there that either persuades you, encourages you to have a physical, a regular fitness to dive examination. And as we grow older, we're not going to get any fitter. So we put together that. I think it's, again, I think the name of the article is Lifelong Guidance for Medical Fitness to Dive. And perhaps we can put the link there.
Put a link in the bottom. Yep, yep, yep.
Yeah. And yeah, I
Hmm,
think we have to remember that, you know, when we're talking about before, you know, the cardiovascular exertion or demand, it might also have to do with how new you are to diving. We don't dive to to do exertion, right? But
Right.
for
Right.
new divers, particularly if you have someone, new that is not young and healthy and fit, this could pose significant challenges, psychological challenges, cardiovascular challenges, that when you've been diving for a while, a dive actually relaxes you.
Mm.
But when you're new to diving, I mean,
Right.
I'm sure you're instructors too, and initially you have someone that on the first day of diving, that first day, those first couple of days after the checkout dives, they're dead. They
Yeah.
spend so much energy that they're
Mm.
dead. So I think our comfort and then our metabolic needs and demands, they change as we become more confident and more one with the water.
Mm.
So I think that's a
Mm.
good point for instructors to consider too.
Very
What
good point.
is not demanding for us could be very well demanding for others. Keep in mind we're using life support equipment to survive a hostile environment,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
the work of breathing, every time you're submerged in water, water will always be colder than your body temperature. You're going to be burning energy to try to compensate that heat loss. All
Mm.
this
Mhm.
is can be, significant for someone. Not having the proper dive gear, losing much more temperature, that causes some significant demand.
Right. Yeah. Mm. Interesting at RF4, we were working through our consensus statements, and it came to getting a rate. If you're over 40, you should get an annual cardiac exam.
Yeah.
That was one of the most contentious consensus statements. People argued about it for 45 minutes. Do you need a diving doc? Can it be a cardiologist? I don't know why people are resistant to that, but that is a strong recommendation, right? If you're 40 or over, you should minimally get a cardiac exam every year, right?
But let alone diving, in over 40, 45, you probably want to see what your cardiovascular health is anyway.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Makes sense. And
On the other hand, I'm sorry,
Mhm.
go on.
No, please. Go on, Tina.
On the other hand, we have measured something very interesting that can be applied to diving as well. Actually, when you increase a bit of your PO2, that's what happened when you're diving, of course,
Right.
your cellular metabolism, while you're doing some mild effort, so this is interesting to keep in mind, in very mild effort with an increased PO2 for your cell is considered as a high effort, which is positive in one way if you do it with sufficient recovery time,
Mm.
but can be negative if you do it too much on a roll. So, what we already said a long ago, just to take 1 day rest after some days of diving, it's still ruling. With even what we learn nowadays, not directly related to cardiac or respiratory or whatever age you have, your cellular metabolism is also impacted in a
Mm.
positive way if you manage it the right way. That's
Mhm.
interesting. We never thought of that 10 years ago, but still, it rules in the same direction.
Wow. Yeah. How about we mentioned older divers, certainly in some communities. Are there special requirements or needs or screenings that older divers or practices that older divers should be paying attention to versus younger?
Well, I would say cardiovascular health for sure.
Yeah, that's the big
Uh,
one.
But
Respiratory.
again, cardiovascular health is depending on your age. So keep
Right.
your cardiovascular health, whatever age you have. That's the difference. You
Yeah,
cannot compete with youngers, but keep your cardiovascular health.
yeah, yeah.
Right.
And
Right.
something we see more often now, not because it's happening more often, but because we're recognizing it more often, is IPE.
Yes.
And IPE, usually you don't see this in young people unless we're talking about how this was initially described with triathletes and perhaps even with Navy SEALs. but they're overexerting to the point that none of us would ever do. But
Right.
so in our world, what we see that is fairly consistent, and I would even say is the presentation is fairly straightforward. Um, and again, it's usually people between mid 50s and above, perhaps, and I want to emphasize perhaps a little bit more prevalent on females than men.
Hmm.
And when you have these people that they have this sudden and increasing shortness of breath while at depth, doesn't mean to be that you're at the bottom of at the deepest point of the
Right.
dive, but still submerged. And this is sometimes something that they notice as uh, just some discomfort, but they can't explain why they are somehow exerting, even though this is not physically demanding. And sometimes this becomes significant enough that it forces them to call off the dive. And
Mm.
at surface, they have all the classic signs and symptoms you would expect. And even sometimes on the hotline, we hear people saying that, people standing next to the diver, they could hear the gurgling sounds in the lungs.
Ah,
If it has
yeah.
four legs, a tail, and it meows, it's a cat, right? So
Yeah.
this is very, very consistent. And we see this more often. Again, not because it's happening more often, but I think it's because we're better
Recognizing it. Yeah.
recognizing it, and lay people recognize it too. When you read data and reports from 20, 30 years ago, what
Hmm.
perhaps what we would consider pulmonary chokes, you read it today and maybe it wasn't chokes, maybe it was an IPE.
Right. Mm. Wow. And the risk is proportional to or unproportional to fitness, right? I mean, the fitter you are, the less risk you get of IPE, assuming you're not super exerting.
I would say perhaps that's a general safe assumption, but I can't say that this is a safe bet. Now,
Mm.
definitely, the older you are, I think the higher your risk. We
Higher
have to
the
remember
risk.
when we're submerged in water, we have some pretty unique cardiovascular challenges that don't happen when you're walking down the street, when you're exerting in a motor in a bicycle, in a stationary bicycle. So all these things, they
Mm.
will push you to the limit. And if you have even the slightest pre-existing cardiovascular thing, this might push you over the edge. Another big issue with diet and habits in general is hydration, right?
Mm. Right. Very
And
important.
we talk about, oh, we need to protect us from dehydration. Well, at the same time, you don't want to overhydrate before a dive,
Mm.
right? And we tend to put too much emphasis in how much dehydration can be a risk for decompression sickness. But I would dare to say that if we measure your hydration level after every dive, you will be dehydrated, not
Mm.
because you're bent, but because dehydration is a known consequence of immersion.
Right.
So it's
Fa-
better to allow ourselves to replenish fluid after you surface than to overhydrate before you dive.
mm. Factino did a study on that, didn't you? On the trip with
Yeah,
deep CCR dives, right? Looking at their hydration and
I did that. I did that. But well, what I said at that time, even long ago, I was explaining that normal volume of your plasma was the best thing you could do, and it has been translated in overhydration, which was not my purpose. But nowadays, there are sometimes very shortcuts that have been spread away by different people. But I would just quote a bit more on what Matthias said. And of course, I totally agree with him. I think now we are doing two different things that can increase immersion
Mhm.
pulmonary edema. First of all, people are too much hydrating themselves, a bit too much, and
Mm.
a lot of them are very much in some kind of diet that increases proteins a lot, and
Mm.
this can
Mm.
also increase your possibility of increasing your pulmonary edema
Huh.
percentage. Then a third thing, and I will just use a kind of rule of thumb, which is wisdom. You know, the rule probably, or the sentence saying that you can be upset because being upset is a kind of reaction, but staying upset, it's not a reaction, it's a decision. And I think in diving and pulmonary edema, or whatever other issues you can have in diving, you can have a trigger sometime, and you have to listen to the trigger. You don't, you are upset, something triggers you, just take the right decision, abort, go out, finish, or stop whatever you're doing that triggers you. But if you want to keep the obsession or being upset, this is a decision. That's the other story. And that means a bit of training and understanding of what happens. Maybe we were focusing too much long ago on some other things that we learn a bit more right now. So other triggers have to be just trained and learned a bit more for divers right now.
Interesting. Yeah. Let me introduce another subject, PFOs, and I want to introduce it in this way. I personally probably know 5, 6 people who have been lifelong divers, no problems, and then suddenly they're getting older, obviously. They've started to have symptoms, skin bends, headaches, different things, and lo and behold, they discover they have an active PFO. But this is after, again, a long period in many cases of diving with no problems. So what's with that? Is it a factor that when you age, your PFOs can actually open up or change, or what's happening with that? Yeah. Do we know?
You-
You
You
probably
want
know
me to
people like
speak?
this too, right? It's similar, right? You probably both know people that have had
Oh
this
yeah,
happen, right? Yeah.
Okay. The only thing I can tell you, just to summarize everything, don't think about age. Don't think about something changes with yourself. This is absolutely true because we know that PFO can open during your lifetime and it can also sometimes close. This is another
Huh.
story about this.
Huh.
But so there is a lot of literature on that, and most of it, I was part of it. So I can tell you that it's multifactorial. So don't consider PFO by itself as their sole, all the best or only reason of your issue. It's always multifactorial, and PFO is one of the factors. But of course, to give a diagnosis, to say it's like this, it's always very convenient to say it's PFO related. Related doesn't mean it's just due to PFO, because we know
Right.
it's a multifactorial stuff. So that's the only thing.
Hmm. Hmm.
so one question
Interesting.
we could ask, to someone that has been diving for a long time and never had any issues. So what changed on that last dive?
Hmm.
Did you do anything abnormal? Did you do any? I mean, one thing that is easy to put things together is, did you by any chance do any forceful activity following a dive? Right, following a dive, you're the, let's put it in simple terms, the Coca-Cola man. You're bubbling. You have VGEs all over. Now, if when you're peaking with VGE, you decide to lift up a heavy object, do Valsalva maneuvers, exert, well, so then that's behavioral, right? So
Yeah.
we know that, yes, you may have a PFO, but you never had any issue for 2,000 dives over 10 years. Why now all of a sudden you had a case that is classic for PFO? Well, did you do any provocative maneuver that perhaps forced you to
Right.
shunt, right?
Right.
I think,
Yep.
again, a good point for general dive masters, dive leaders. The dive master is usually the one that is expected to do everything. The dive, the guide, and be the skipper, and also by the end of the operation, he's the one carrying cylinders around back and forth. Is he the
Yeah.
best person to be doing physical exertion following some significant exposure? I would say no, but the
Probably
dive
not.
master,
Yeah. Yeah.
dive slave, he's the one that we're expecting to do all the heavy lifting, and it might not be in his best interest.
Mm. Mm. Yes. I wanted to ask you, I know Dan is working on develop, and many people are developing telemedicine and wearable monitoring solutions for diving, right? I mean, et cetera. How do you see these kinds of technologies like the Dana Health influencing our health and fitness going forward? I mean, yeah, do you see this having a positive effect on divers, being able to monitor more? Talk to me a little about that, maybe.
Tino or me? Sorry. So I think
Jump in, yeah. Yeah.
I think we're just seeing the tip of the iceberg. With all these, sensors and biometric sensors, and having a super powerful computer in our pocket that is constantly connected to the internet, I think it's only a matter of time until we have more and more live integration and I don't know if I would call it telemedicine, but perhaps, like some sort of telemetry, monitoring
Right.
monitoring vital signs and different variables. The term telemedicine is also something that I think I've been watching this closely for a long time. For obvious reasons, what we do at Dan has the expectation of telemedicine.
Mm,
And in many cases, it is practically doable. Say, for instance, somebody showing us pictures or an image of a skin bend that is so clinically rich that in practical terms, you could do a diagnosis there. Is the
mm,
legal framework what we don't have, right? Because if I make a medical decision over someone on a screen, and this someone say I'm in the US, and this someone is from Colombia, and this guy is in Indonesia, there's no medical license that would cover you. So even if we're doing the right thing and
right.
achieving the right results, what we're doing is technically still illegal. So it's the legal framework that is going to be the limiting factor, not the technological or operational one.
Interesting. Like, and just to clarify for our listeners, if they don't know, the Dana Health Unit that the Dan Europe's developing, the idea is you would have monitors on the diver. They come up, oh, I'm not feeling well, something's wrong. You could place a call to Dan, and the doctor could be reading all your vitals, and you could have a camera, for to show them, and then they could. That's the idea of it, and be able to direct you or direct treatment based on that. So, but you're saying it's the legal issue. We have the technology maybe, but the legal issues aren't
Right.
resolved yet.
In that
Yeah.
particular example you gave with these devices, it could be different because eventually you have a direct relationship, and there is even an agreement, an expectation for service, a two-way interaction. It's the
Mhm.
hotline part that is more challenging,
Mm,
right? I mean,
right.
you could do a telemedicine type of engagement, a telepresence with, FaceTime or,
Sure.
or something. So you're face to face with someone. There are many things you could do. I don't know if many, but there are some things you could do, many more that you probably couldn't because you're not there.
Hmm.
But on those that you can, again, classic example is something as clinical as an image of your skin, an infection, right? An open wound,
Right.
a real life injury, and you could give them instructions and you could get the results that you want. But what you did is still illegal depending on where you are, where this person is, where you're from.
Right. Interesting.
Legal
Yeah.
medical practice in different countries varies a lot.
Mm, yeah. No, that makes sense.
Just a few
Eh,
seconds. On
Yeah.
top of that, I think we can cover with this kind of device, we can cover something that people is very ripe or very confident in right now, is just to monitor themselves. So it's
Mm,
also educational. Just only seeing it as a telemedicine in case of problem is just a part of it.
right.
Educationally, you can also follow probably your own health and your own VO2 or something. We're just putting together something that can help you in that direction as well. So again, this is multifactorial, and a lot of different things can be considered together to be educational, not only on a
Yeah.
cure phase, but that's okay. We're facing new era right now.
Yeah.
Mm. And having that data, I mean, I have a ultra watch, so I monitor my running and my sleeping and my all my physical activities. And as you say, it's really you begin to learn about yourself So with that, for divers to be able to monitor what's happening while they're diving, could get a lot of new information for them, and yeah, very educational experience for sure. Yeah. Closing messages. I'll ask you both. Do you have a closing message for our readers, watchers, with regards to fitness and diving? Dino, you want to go first?
So for me, I would say I would urge everybody just on how we open this. The real boogeyman in diving is not bubbles, it's not decompression sickness, it's the heart.
Hmm.
So monitor your heart condition. If you are over 45, even without thinking about diving, it's a good idea to know what your cardiovascular health is. And if you're diving, moreover, because while diving, you will have some
Right.
unique cardiovascular challenges that are worth paying attention to. And as we grow older, we're not getting any healthier. So eventually these regular exams, they should ideally be more often. So again,
Hmm.
go online, lifelong medical fitness to dive on our website. This is our 2 cents as to what we think is reasonable to take care of your health.
Great. Thank you. And check out that article for sure, people. Dino.
So just, I won't say the same thing as Matthias, because of course I could say the same. We're on the same page on this. I would just add, listen to yourself. Learn to listen to yourself. And don't make your own voice while you're having problems. Just shut up. I can do better than that. Just listen to it. And if you go too far, just stop. Abort the dive. Don't push yourself. Don't be under peer pressure. Don't consider that you can do more than you think. Or if you want to do this, prepare yourself. And this goes in the same direction. Just be who you are. Again, being upset is a reaction. Staying upset is a decision. So again, you have a reaction, you have something telling you, just stop. Don't keep it on. And you'll be fine.
Great. Thank you, Dino. So I thank you both. Yeah, we'll go from there.
Wonderful.
Thank you.